Just a reminder that we're going to have people's webcams and their mics muted. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to use the chat feature, and we'll be able to ask them to Lori throughout the presentation. There'll be times where she pauses and gives an opportunity to ask questions. If anyone is joining by phone, then they can unmute their phone and ask a question at that time. But otherwise, anyone on the computer, just type it into the chat feature and we'll read the questions out loud. I do see that it's 1 o'clock and we want to start this on time. So welcome to everyone who has joined us online. We're happy to present another webinar with Lori Gunther-Reeser. And this time we're looking at saying thank you. I'm going to turn it over to you, Lori.
Okay. I want to say hi to everyone. I'm really glad to be here. I'm sitting in Mississauga. It's not really as dark as it appears. And I'm going to switch it over to my slideshow so that we can talk about saying thank you, which has got to be one of my most favorite topics ever. So are we there? Can you see my show?
We can see your show, but you can also mute your camera and then we'll just look at your slides.
Okay, that would be a good idea then. My slides are a lot better looking than me.
Yeah.
All right, saying thank you. I'm Lori Gunther-Reeser, and it is, believe it or not, already December the 6th, 2017, and I find that kind of a surprise, but it's a good thing. So I'm glad you're all here, and I'm really delighted to be working with the Presbyterian Church in Canada to connect with people from churches all over the place and talk about something that's really near and dear to my heart. So I'm going to be talking about the 4 seasons of saying thank you. You'll be able to tell by the pictures how far along we are. I want to make this as accessible as possible. And as Karen and Janice have already said, if you have questions, type them in at the side, and there'll be plenty of times to stop and address those. Some of you will have heard my bio more than once already, so I'll try to keep it to the highlights. I'm one of those interesting individuals who would first study statistics and then study theology. I've been really fascinated by Christian giving for quite a while now. I studied it from the New Testament perspective in my master's, and for my Doctor of Ministry, I continued that way and also did a lot of research talking to Christians across the country. I called it my church basement tour of Christian giving. And I've posted the results of that on my website. What you also may want to know about me that's kind of pertinent to the topic at hand is I keep a happy file of special thank you notes that I've received. I have it downstairs. I inadvertently made a number of charitable gifts at the same time when my husband and I started using a gifting account. And it was a really fascinating experiment because we made all these charitable donations at the same time, and we got the thank you letters in varying amounts of time. Some were still waiting. I'd like to talk to the Apostle Paul in the hereafter. I'd like to get in that queue. I've spent so many years already talking about and learning about Paul's collection for Jerusalem in the early church, but I still have more things I'd like to know. So those all, in my mind, relate to the topic of saying thank you. So let's get started. Saying thank you, the 4 seasons. We'll start with the spring. Children's giving is a great place to start because children are so real and joyful and spontaneous in their giving. I want to tell you 2 stories, both of them from my home church, which is Hamilton Mennonite. We have an Advent giving project each year where the children collect the offering and it goes to special projects, and we put ornaments on the tree to recognize how much we've collected so far. So we're just getting that started. One year their giving project was for wells in Africa. It was to help children in Africa have clean water, and we told the children the story and showed them the picture of what their money would do. And then it was a turn for the children. We picked a couple who would go around and collect the offering. And one little boy, and his name was Josiah, he was about 3, and he was he was fabulous. He had his water pitcher, and instead of just passing the pitcher down the rows, he was small enough that he could go down the rows himself with the pitcher and stand in front of each person and collect their contributions to help the children. And there are a lot of children in Africa right now who are drinking clean water thanks to him, because he was a very well, he helped people to be generous in a very effective way. And so I've learned from him. And I think of another boy too in our church. We have an offering where we collect money for a hospital, a Mennonite hospital in the Congo, and we've been doing this for a long time. And then it's a basket. It's often coins, but it doesn't have to be. And one day, this boy must have been goofing off or something, and he missed his chance when the offering went by to put his coins in. And he promptly threw a fit, as kids would do. And his father wisely decided that the best thing to do would be let him run up and put his money in during the service. And the worship leader thanked the boy, said, "Thanks, Josh, for that sermon on the importance of giving," because it is really important, and he wanted to be part of it. There's so much we can learn from our kids, and I think we can also learn about saying thank you from our kids. If you were to say thank you to a 4-year-old, I don't think you'd have to think very hard about how to do it. You would use their name, you'd be personal, and you'd say, "Thank you, Hannah, that was wonderful." You'd be prompt. If Hannah gave money to a project in April, you wouldn't wait till December to say thank you to Hannah. She might have forgotten or moved on by then. You'd say thank you as soon as you possibly could. And you tell a story about whether it was wells in Africa or whether it was helping a food bank in Halifax. You would tell her exactly what difference it made. And I'm happy to tell you that the rules of saying, not the rules, but the best advice for saying thank you to a 4-year-old, personal, prompt, and using pictures, are exactly the same way that you would say thank you to grown-ups. The same principles apply exactly. To be personal, to use their name, whether that's a letter or a phone call, to be prompt, and to use pictures or tell a story. I've worked for a lot of charities. This is what I do. Charities and churches are my thing. And the rule for charities, the big charities, your World Vision, your Cancer Society, your hospital, etc., are that a thank you goes out within 24 hours. I'm not saying that you have to do this, but I want you to know that if your donor, if your member from a church is sitting down in December, and I met a woman like this at a Presbyterian church just last night, she sits down in December and she makes all her charitable gifts. I don't know where those are all going, but if she gives money to the hospital, she's going to get a thank you letter right away. If she gives money to your church, I think there's probably going to be a silence in response. And that silence can be interpreted as, well, we didn't really need your money, or, it wasn't enough. So I want you to be aware that that silence can be interpreted in a negative way by people. So prompt is good, personal is good, and tell a story. What difference did your gift make? Think about talking to a child, because that'll give you the answers that you need. You'll be able to figure it out. Well, thank you because you gave money to our church and we had Alcoholics Anonymous on Thursday, and that really, it gives people hope. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to tell the entire story. You don't have to send them your entire church budget. Just tell them a story, something real, something that happens at your church that makes a difference. So really this slide is 100% of what I need to say that's important. Just think about how you would talk to a child. Be natural and honest and excited, because saying thank you is a wonderful thing. Can anyone tell me, maybe in the comments section, what Bible verse this picture is? We're moving on to summer here, and I want to talk about theology of giving. I'm just wondering if anyone can tell me what Bible verse this picture is from.
Hi, Lori.
Yeah.
We have Shannon Bell, who has said it's lilies of the field.
Yes, consider the lilies. Even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. I think it's Emily Dickinson who said that was the only commandment she ever obeyed. These lilies are actually from my back garden, and I'm very fond of them. And consider the lilies reminds us of God's abundance and God's care. That's his mercies, which are new every morning. And I don't think this is news to us. We sing this, the psalmist recites this. This is in our worship, but sometimes when we get to our church budget, we forget. We don't consider the lilies quite as much. So I want to talk here in this section on the summer about the theology of giving, because saying thank you is It's an effective thing to do. It's a good fundraising principle, but I don't want us to do it because that's what the hospital does or that's what the Cancer Society does. I want us to say thank you because it's part of our theology. So like I said, when we sing psalms or from the hymn book, we often talk about the abundance of a generous God. God's grace is limitless. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. This is our theology. It's a theology of abundance. It's not a prosperity gospel. We're not saying that we're all going to be rich, but that God always gives us what we need. If I was in church, actually, I'd be asking for a chorus of amen, but I'll assume that you're familiar with this concept. And like I said, when we get to the budget, somehow we can get caught up in scarcity as if we had forgotten all those things that we know to be true about God. And we can get the idea of that there's just not enough, and that, if the more that goes to project A, the less there'll be for project B, never thinking that there could be enough for both. Like I said, I've worked with churches and charities. That's what I do. And people and organizations can be anxious or they can be grateful. And it has nothing to do with how much money we actually have or how many resources we actually have. It's just our perception. I'm sure you've met people too who have very little in terms of actual cash on hand, but who are very grateful and willing to share what they do have. And people who have a lot who hold on very tightly with clenched fists. And so it's important to think about what our own theology of money is and what messages we hear in church. Do we hear anxiety or do we hear gratitude? And saying thank you is a wonderful opportunity to articulate our theology and say, God gives us everything we need and we are so grateful. So it's just putting our theology into practice, and it's a joyful opportunity to do so. And like I said, being anxious or grateful isn't about how much we have. It's just recognizing that God gives us what we need. I'm a big fan, as I said, of the Apostle Paul. And this little diagram here is my interpretation from James Dunn, who is a New Testament theologian. I should check, maybe he's Presbyterian. And he talks about, this is based on 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. If we start at the top, let's start with God. God gives us what we need. God's grace flows to people. And we celebrate that in worship and in so many other ways. And as people of God, as God's beloved children, we respond to God's gift of grace with gracious action. And that gracious action is kindness and praise and sharing what we have in terms of our money, our time, and our talents. And then we as people, we are both the givers and the receivers, because we receive the gracious actions of others as well as being part of contributing our own gracious actions. So whether we are the donors or the recipients, we're always both in some way. We can respond with praise and thanksgiving to God, thanking God for the grace that we've received and the gracious action of others. And so the circle of grace goes round and round. And that's really quite clear in 2 Corinthians. I could talk about that for a week, but let's suffice it to say that God is gracious to us always, and that we have an opportunity to respond to God's grace with gracious action, with giving of our own. And then we thank God. And God continues to be gracious, not because of our praise and thanksgiving, but because God is gracious. So that's an underlying theology, the circle of grace model of giving, where it's all based on God's grace to us. If it's based on anything else, if we're just trying to think that the money is ours to start with, then we can't really be very generous or grateful. So as Janice and Karen have noted, if you have any questions, please type them in. I'm always delighted to engage or to answer any questions. If I've explained something too fast, I'm happy to go back and try to explain it a different way.
So far, we don't have any questions, so keep going and we'll keep an eye out for them. Oh, wait.
Okay.
Here comes one. I'm wondering about how to have the time and resources to say thanks to people promptly and personally. We have several hundred who support our mission over the years, but we're finding it's taking so much time and energy of the pastoral team to respond to each gift coming in that it took away from a lot from doing actual ministry work. We don't really have the people here within the ministry who can take this on. How do we make this happen efficiently?
I think that saying thank you to people is ministry too. Because I see giving as a spiritual discipline and encouraging people in generosity to be a spiritual discipline like prayer. So maybe that's part of the mindset that I would encourage you to think about, is that thanking our donors is ministry too. That doesn't mean that doesn't address the efficiency question, but it doesn't take more time to thank donors on a weekly or a daily basis than it does to like leave it until it's a great big, it's like doing the dishes, right? You could wait until you have a week's worth and really, have motor through it, and there'll be a ton and you'll be kind of grumpy about it, or you could do them every day. And doing the dishes is exactly the wrong metaphor to use, because this is the most joyful thing. But if you can make a few phone calls every day, it'll be something that you look forward to doing, and a real chance to engage the people that are keeping your ministry going.
Shannon's making a point that the people are from outside their ministry and we need to spend time on people we're called to reach out to. She's coming from a little bit of a unique situation where they've got a ministry in northern British Columbia, and they get support from around the congregations.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I can't, if with a blanket answer, say how exactly you should say thank you, but it really is important. And ask the people that contribute to you, would they how is the best way to say, what would be meaningful to them? They'll tell you, and they'll appreciate being asked. So maybe that would have been a better answer than my first answer, is to ask.
And I think sometimes you can feel at peace, because I know, Shannon, you're sending out your newsletters and updates to people who are giving to the ministry. And so if you're providing people with stories and pictures and inspirations and information about what you're doing, feel at peace if you don't have the time to phone each of them individually.
It would be a great board meeting to once a year at the board meeting or your session or whatever whatever you want to, whatever occasion that is, for once a year, to have a thanks for giving event and have board members start calling people. You'd be amazed how many people you can call in 2 hours if you have 10 people making the calls. Any other questions?
We have a few other questions, so let me just see if I can group some of them. One is that many charities quantify gifts as $100 pays for 2 goats to a poor family. In reality, the biggest expense at our church is my salary. So what's the story that goes with that?
That is an excellent question. Narrative budgeting is a workshop that we did, about a month ago now. And that is the whole point there is that salary isn't a black hole, nor is the light bill, nor the hydro bills, but that your church is a place of ministry, and having a pastor is empowering all kinds of wonderful things to happen, what God is doing in your congregation. So yes, translating the staff column of the budget and the building column of the budget into worship and education and outreach and missions is super important, because the story of what the pastor did on Tuesday morning is often a story of mission. You took a phone call, you helped someone in distress, you were able to visit someone who's ill. Yeah, turning this pastor's salary into a story of mission is my usual answer to that is, what did you do on Tuesday morning? Tell this story.
Somebody else wants to know if using a form letter for thanking is better than no thanks at all, if it can't be personal.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And somebody else, great. And somebody else agrees Wayne shares that in his experience, saying thank you in a timely way helps to retain donors. Time is not made but spent. How we invest in saying thank you is expressing God's heart to those folks.
Well said. Yes, it's an opportunity to express God's heart.
Okay, I think I got the questions and comments, so I can move on and we'll keep an eye for more.
Okay, great. Thank you. So giving thanks. As I've said about in my model, Paul's model of generosity, of giving, assumes gratitude, and it assumes talking about money, which is something that Paul does and something that Jesus does. If I could, one day I'm going to get a cross stitch made that says Jesus talked about money, we don't, and sell the pattern to churches. But we can do this. We can talk about money. We can follow the example, and there's lots of scriptural examples of gratitude in talking about money. One thing I did in my research is I did a little bit of a survey. I shouldn't say a little bit of a survey because it had academic rigor to it. One of the questions that I asked my people was whether they agree or disagree, whether I'm regularly thanked for my donations. And that my findings I call the gratitude gap, in that secular charities like the hospital and the Cancer Society, most people said, oh yes, I'm regularly thanked for that. Or Christian charities outside of my denomination. So these would be your World Visions, Focus on the Family, those sorts of things. People said, oh yes, I'm regularly thanked for my donations to those kinds of charities. My own charities related to my own denomination, they said they were less likely to say that they were thanked. And their local church responded was the least likely to say thank you. So there's a gratitude gap, and that breaks my heart because we have such a great story to tell. We worship God together. That's such an important thing to do. And we have this great model of praising God and being thankful for a generous God, and then we don't say thank you. Yeah, I could go on and on and on and on, but it's a sad thing. This is another name that biblical story slide. I think you know who the guy in the white is. I'll give you a hint. The number of other figures in the picture is 10. 9 of them are headed in one direction, and one is kissing Jesus's feet.
Yeah, people online are saying that they see it's the leper who's returning to give thanks.
Yes, I almost feel like it could just stand alone. I mean, Jesus healed everyone regardless. He wasn't waiting to only heal the person who said thank you. But I've often wondered if we could apply this to the church, if, you know, what, and some people will say, well, you know, that's a different situation. Of course, it's a different situation. And so if you didn't want to say thank you directly, but you were just saying, in taking time during worship to thank God for all the people who contribute their time and their talent and their treasure to the church, that would be, I would happily agree with you on that and say, well, we don't thank people, but we always thank God for all our donors. That would be an excellent start. I wouldn't argue with you on that one. I think you should do both, but if you were only thanking God, that sounds ridiculous, but thanking God for our donors and thanking people for being generous, because their generosity is funding God's work. So that is the parable of the 10 lepers, which doesn't get preached so much in a stewardship context, but there's no reason why not. I have the next slide as a but slide, because I've heard but lots of times, and that's fine. It's good to have a discussion. A lot of us, I think especially an older generation of folks, and I don't think Presbyterians are an exception here, have been taught that it's our duty to give, much more of an Old Testament model that it is our duty to give, and it is our duty to give quietly and privately, and perhaps even secretly. And the story that I hear in sort of to support this line of thinking is the left hand and the right hand story about giving in private. And I think it's worth talking a little bit about that left hand, right hand story, because that's not the only narrative about giving, certainly not in the Bible, in the scriptures. Acts would be one of my favorite stewardship texts, that's for sure. But giving is a spiritual discipline like prayer. We pray regularly, and we pray spontaneously when we're very happy or very sad, and lots of other times too. And similarly, we give or we're encouraged to give regularly on a regular basis, and that's something that Paul talks about when he's talking to the Corinthians and others about giving, is giving as God has prospered you and putting money away on a regular basis. So we have regular giving and spontaneous giving in response to causes, and we have regular giving and spontaneous prayer. So they're very parallel disciplines. And the left hand and the right hand story talks about both giving and prayer. It talks about the man who was, really boasting in the street about giving some money to a poor person on the street, and then a man who was praying in the street and making a great big deal about it. Now, somehow, when we talk about this story now, I haven't heard too many people say, oh, well, we shouldn't pray in church because that would be too boastful. And if you do, I think most of us do pray in our church, not in a boastful way, but because we want to pray together, and we also want to teach prayer and model prayer so that we can pray when we're home too. And so too with giving. I think we can talk about giving not in a boastful way or in a proud way, but in a way that encourages other people to be generous, that acknowledges God as a source of all our generosity. Doesn't mean that we're going to I don't think we're in any danger of creating peacocks or people who are very boastful about their giving, but we are in danger, if we don't say anything, of letting our culture around us tell all the stories about money. I did a stewardship workshop recently on Black Friday to a group of church people, and I said, we need to tell our stories of generous God and how we give everything, our life, our time, our talents, our money, in response to what God has already given us. We need to tell this story, because if we don't, our culture has plenty of stories about money, and they're very, very pervasive. They're everywhere. So I do think we need to talk about money and talk about giving so that our culture doesn't do all the talking for us. So I'll give you another look at the Circle of Grace model, and these slides will be posted. It starts with God. God's grace flows to people, and that's something that we can celebrate each and every day, regardless of our circumstances. And then people respond to other people with gracious action of kindness, of caring, of giving, volunteering. There's so many things that one could add to the list here. And most days, we are both the givers and the receivers. And we respond to God by saying, thank you, God, for the people who have helped me today. Thank you for the generous people who have supported me today and every day. And God, in God's immense graciousness, whether we say thank you or not, continues to be gracious to us. So this is coming from, again, from Paul's letter to the Corinthians. 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 is the basis, and James Dunn is the scholar who I'm citing here. So let's get a little more practical. Ways to say thank you. We thank God for generous givers, volunteers, committee members, people who teach Sunday school, serve communion, visit the sick. I could go on and on. And one of the easiest ways to say thank you is to tell stories. The week that you thank people who mow the lawn and shovel the walks is the week to be thankful for all the people who use the church building during the week. So be grateful for the people to contribute to the, I'm talking about Peach Blossom here. That's my favorite pretend church. Be grateful to the people who contribute to the ongoing ministry of Peach Blossom, the light bill, the heat, so that people can attend AA meetings and find hope, or come to the food bank and be encouraged and get food to eat. People who tend to our building by shoveling and mowing, by keeping the lights on. These people tell people that who come here that Peach Blossom is a place of caring. So our lights and our utility bills aren't just, they're not just items on our budget. They're ways that we show caring to our community because of all the things that happen at our church. Same thing with the pastor's salary and the secretary's salary, for that matter. When we contribute money so that we can do ministry in our church, wonderful things happen. And I always use Tuesday morning as an example, but what happened on Tuesday? How was God active in your congregation and through your ministry staff on Tuesday? It doesn't have to be a long story, it just has to be a real story. Pinterest is a great source of creative thank you ideas. If any of you are that way inclined, that's where this little photo came from. Where can you tell stories? During worship would be a great place to start. That's where your community of faith is gathered to praise God and say thank you to God for the ways that God has been at work. That seems obvious. You can say thank you in the bulletin, at church meetings, by video, on the website, at a special celebration, in the newsletter, at the youth group, on the bulletin board, on Facebook, at a seniors tea. I could go on and on. Really, anywhere where 2 or 3 are gathered is a place to say thank you. A previous webinar participant graciously shared an idea that they do at their church. They have amazing grace moments, AGM. It's an annual general meeting of a different kind, where they share wonderful things that God has been doing in their congregation in the past year, and they have a celebration. And I just think that's an awesome idea. It's a way to say thank you and to share what's going on in the life of your church. So you could send a note or call or visit or email, depending on the person. I would generally say that the older the person, the more a phone call works, but there's no one size fits all. Simply thanking people for being part of the church is a wonderful way to start. To thank people for donating, to share a story of what you're grateful for. Like at the food bank this week, a family came by and they were so grateful because they're going to have oatmeal for breakfast every day this week, and their kids won't go to school hungry. That's a great story. It doesn't have to be a story about how many people were fed, but just one story about one person that made a difference. Now, I have no research to support this next point. I'll just say that flat out. It's my own bias, but if a thank you note that included a painting from a Sunday school child would melt my heart. And I'm not saying that you have to line up all your 4-year-olds and get the paintbrushes out. I think, you'll know when a situation might need something special or would benefit from something special. I don't mean that you have to thank everyone every day. Maybe it's 3. Maybe you thank 3 people a week, or you have something. I think it's a great spiritual discipline for all of us who are in ministry in many forms, and I mean lay people and leaders equally, to pause and be grateful for the people in our congregation and to show that in a tangible way. It's building up the body of Christ. So there's loads and loads of ways to do this, and I don't mean it to be adding another burden to your back, but something joyful to do, to say, I am glad you're here. I'm glad you're part of this congregation. One thing that most churches will do is send out an annual receipt. Please include a thank you letter. And maybe you don't know what to say in your thank you letter, so you could base it on an existing letter. I'm pretty sure that the Apostle Paul wouldn't mind. This letter is to the 2 Corinthians. It might give you some ideas. Remember too that Paul was commending the Macedonians who gave out of their deep poverty. So this is not the prosperity gospel. I want to remind you of that again. We're not promising that if you give to Peach Blossom that God will give you a Cadillac, but we are reminding people that God will always continue to be good, and there will always continue to be enough. For God is the one who provides seed for the farmer and then bread to eat. In the same way, he will provide and increase your resources and then produce a great harvest of generosity. And what the great harvest of generosity looks like at your church is something that you will know. Does that mean that the choir will sing and that the Sunday school classes will have goldfish crackers and learn stories about Jesus? That sounds like a great harvest to me. Yes, you will be enriched in every way so that you can always be generous. And generous according to what you have. And when we take your gifts to those who need them, they will thank God. So 2 good things will result from this ministry of giving. The needs of the believers in Jerusalem will be met, and it's not just Jerusalem, obviously, but that's where Paul was focusing. And they will joyfully express their thanks to God. And this may sound a little bit familiar because the Circle of Grace model of giving is based from here. As a result of your ministry, they will give glory to God. And I'm confident that that's what you're doing in your churches. You're giving glory to God. So when people contribute to your church, they are helping in the ministry that you have of glorifying God together. And that's no small thing.
Can you tell us which, can you tell us which chapter this comes from in Corinthians?
Second Corinthians, not 9. Sorry, I've spent so much time for this that it didn't even occur to me that I didn't cite it. Sorry. As a result of your ministry, they will give glory to God. For your generosity to them and to all believers will prove that you are obedient to the good news of Christ. And they will pray for you with deep affection because of the overflowing grace God has given to you. Thank God for this gift too wonderful for words. Even if you just use that one, it's all there. We have the scripture provides us with all the words of gratitude, more than we could ever use in a lifetime. I chose this one because it's a personal favorite, but there's lots. You could pick out almost any psalm. So my point there is that we have some really good role models to follow, and that including a thank you letter in your annual. Christians, we have the best resources to draw on. We don't have to, we're not, in terms of and compared to the hospital or the Cancer Society, we have such a common faith that we share with the people who've contributed to our church. We really have a rich, the words are failing me, but we have rich resources to draw on when we say thank you for everything that God is doing among us. Let's take a break for questions before Laura gets too excited about 2 Corinthians. It happens time and time again.
All right, so far I don't see any. People might start typing now, but if you want to keep going, then I'll let you know if some questions pop up.
Okay, great. Memorial gifts and bequests occurred to me as what the winter topic should be. Is bequests are gifts in your will, gifts in a person's will, like part of their estate. And memorial gifts are made in memory of someone who's passed away usually. So these are winter kind of giving, it seemed to me. So for memorial gifts, this is quite common. Does your congregation recognize memorial gifts? If Grandmother Thompson has passed away, and they make a donation to your church in memory of Grandmother Thompson, what do you do? And is there an annual service where such gifts are recognized and our families invited to attend? This is a very meaningful way to honor someone's legacy of generosity and to reach out to the community. So I'd really encourage you to think about how we're going to thank people who've made a memorial gift, or how we're even going to let people know that they can make a memorial gift, that we would encourage them to do so. And saying thank you for the memorial gifts is by far and away the easiest way to let people know that memorial gifts are something that they can do. And bequests, like I said, are gifts in your will, and we have Janice here who is much more of an expert than I am in this area. Does your congregation actively encourage church members to leave a gift in their wills? It's not even an abstract notion for me. It's if you left $1 million to the hospital will tell you exactly beforehand actually what they need $1 million for. But if you left $1 million to your church, would people think, oh, they're just going to fight about it? That's the textbook answer, but I'm drawing on actual experience here for sure. And do you have a policy for handling bequest gifts? And that's, as I said, off topic, but important, because if people think that you're just going to argue about it, then that bequest is not going to be forthcoming. And does your congregation have a way to recognize and honor such gifts? Those are all really big topics. Probably you want to start with saying thank you to the people who give on a regular basis, but this is also things that you want to consider. And like I said, celebrating a bequest or memorial gift is such a lovely way to say, oh, I didn't know you could do that. And it honors our faithful members who have been generous donors all their lives, and then they choose to make a gift to our church when they pass on too. That's just a lasting gift of kindness that we want to honor and recognize and say thank you.
Those are great, Lori. We have one question that has popped up. Being a mission that involves both Christians and non-Christians, how can we best say thanks to those who don't share our faith without apologizing for or hiding our faith?
Say more about what kind of mission it is.
Okay, well, Wayne maybe types that in. I'll say, for example, though, sometimes people might support a refugee sponsorship through the congregation, and they may be from the church, from the community, and not necessarily from the church. How can the congregation thank them in a way that sort of recognizes their faith, but doesn't, even though they might be people who don't share their faith?
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. That example makes it clear. Well, you're in a wonderful position in the congregation in that this person or these people who've contributed trust you. And they respect what you're doing, even if they don't share why you're doing it. So in a situation like that, where it's a gift to the church, I think you can send the same letter to those people as well, and say they know you're doing this because of your faith, that Jesus welcomed everyone. So they already know that. So, and they already respect it, or they wouldn't have given you the money in the first place. So you don't have to. I mean, it's different than it's a sincere thank you. We're doing this because of our faith, and we are glad that you were able to help us. And whether you're from our church or not, we are glad that we are able to together to do this. And I don't think that's exactly how you want the letter to go, but because they already support your church, you don't have to. I don't think you have to worry.
There's a few ideas that have come in on the side. William Ball suggests use language like, thanks for being a partner, for sharing our values, and for making a difference. So language like that. Wayne just clarified that his question was particular. They worked on community development and outreach and medical work in Nicaragua, but I think your example would apply to that.
Yeah, and I think probably now that I've had 30 seconds to ponder, the refugee story letter would probably say, hey, you know what, we took our family swimming at the Y for the very first time, and the kids had a wonderful time, and they were so delighted, and they're starting school, and they're feeling safe, and thank you. We do this work because Jesus calls us to do us, and thank you, because you've really made a difference in the lives of this family.
Somebody else is saying, we have a wish list at our church for items that are not included in the operating budget, but are needed to support our ministries. Do things like this, i.e. special item requests, affect people's desire to contribute to the general budget?
It depends how you present them. People will often do both. It's the people that give to your general budget who are probably going to be the people that contribute to the special items as well. And I think that I'll reference again the narrative budgeting, because if we can tell the stories of what our church actually does, that in a way that instead of having it sort of be a black hole of staff and building as if those things weren't part of God's work, if we can tell the stories of how paying the light bill actually helps us to have meetings about refugee families, and how the pastor's salary is a way for us to be salt and light by reaching out and going on hospital visits and listening to phone calls from people in distress. Once we can put stories of how our contributions to staff and building are actually contributions to worship and education and mission and outreach, then the special project isn't. We don't want the special projects to be the ones that have a story, and the general work of the church to not have a story, because then one's tangible and one's not. If we can put stories to both, then it's easier to fund the general work of our church.
That's great. And it reminds me, it could be a future webinar topic. When we do Stewards by Design, we talk about different giving doors. And just as a principle, for most times, particularly if you're talking about your undesignated giving and the impact it can have, your special projects won't take away, but will contribute to and enhance and add your undesignated giving gifts. But that could be a whole webinar topic for the future, so we'll come explore that. I've got a comment. I've got a comment from Linda, who's asking about memorial bequests and donations. She says sometimes when the donors give, they want it done with confidentiality. Is there a way we can share about the donation while keeping confidentiality, or should we ask permission to share about their gift?
Oh, if they would prefer the gift not to be acknowledged, that's fine. That is, they'll want to respect that above all. But you could ask them, you're not publishing the amount. You're just saying, we are so grateful that we received a gift in memory of Mrs. Gertrude Thompson. We're thankful that she was a faithful member of our congregation for 45 years, and we want to celebrate her generosity in life and that as she continues to be generous. We're grateful. That's just off the top of my head, but ask them if you would like her to be recognized without any kind of amount. I'm not suggesting that the amounts go up there.
Often when somebody dies, there's multiple donors. So the donors themselves may want to stay anonymous, but you can celebrate that gifts came in memory of the person who they were given in.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. That's where I was headed with that.
Good. Okay, I think that we have covered the questions so far.
I think if there was one thing that I would want to encourage people to do is just to think back to the first slide about how you would say thank you to a 4-year-old, where you wouldn't worry if you didn't cover every last detail of it, but you would choose something that illustrates how their gift is helping. You would tell them that story and share it with them and say, dear Hannah, thank you. Your gift made a difference because now this boy can go to school. Something simple, and share that kind of a story when you send out your receipts.
Great. So far, we don't have any more questions. Oh, wait. Here goes. Oh, another comment from William. Please share about sharing stories more than once.
Sorry, I didn't quite get that.
I think it's a comment to say that you can share your sharing stories more than once. You can share them multiple times.
Oh, for sure. Well, if I have a good story, I'm going to use it 100 times. And also, if it's in the newsletter, it could also be the sermon story. And if it's a story that you shared before the offering, it could also be on your Facebook page. Yes. Yeah. And those stories also, if you were writing a note to a donor, if you had the Christmas pageant, say, and a number of families that don't normally come to your church, but because they're related to the child that's in the Christmas pageant, they came. When you're sending out a thank you letter or calling that week, you would say, oh, you know what, we're so grateful that you gave to support the work of this church. The kind of work that you're supporting is that we were able to reach out to the community this week because all these people came to our Christmas pageant. So we're grateful to your contribution because, without people supporting the work of this church, we couldn't do things like that. So the stories that you use in whatever way can also be the stories that you share when you're thanking donors more one-to-one.
Great point. Thank often and in multiple ways.
Yes, and it's impossible to say thank you too many times. I'm convinced of that.
Okay, do you have anything else for us?
I feel like that was quite a few things. But yeah, I would go back just to the if you start to get overwhelmed by the whole process, think, well, how would I say thank you to a child? I would use their name. I would try to be prompt about it, and I would tell them a story of some kind. But that works for grown-ups, and my point is also that we can do this. It's not something difficult or complicated. If we can think of just the simple gratitude that we all know intuitively, we can do this. Okay. Is there anything else? I can't hear you, but I wanted to say thank you to everyone who attended the webinar. It's been fun.
Oops, we had our mic muted. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Thanks
No,
to everyone for joining. That's it for today, we think. And yeah, we look forward. We've got another Stewardship and Plan Giving webinar on January 3rd, which will look at legacy gifts. Bye, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.